If you think that your fish is dying, here are the most common symptoms to look for. Fortunately, some of them are treatable, and you may be able to save them even if you notice the symptoms. Gasping for air. One common sign that a fish is dying is that it will be gasping for air. If your fish is gasping for air, it could be caused by the following. There's not enough oxygen in the water water is high in ammonia, they are suffering from a disease such as ick, columnaris, anchor worms, or gill flukes. The tank is too crowded, the temperature in the tank is too high. Solutions. As you can see, there are a few different reasons that your Betta may be gasping for air. So if you see it in your tank, the first thing you should do is perform a water change to get some fresh water back into the tank, which will solve a lot of the problems temporarily. First of all, if the ammonia was too high before, it should return to a safe level. If there wasn't enough oxygen in the tank before, adding new water will increase the amount of oxygen in the tank. And if the temperature in the tank is too high, as long as you're adding water that's cooler, then the temperature will drop. Once you've added new water, you can then work on permanent solutions for your fish. If the tank is overstocked, consider purchasing a bigger tank or moving fish into another tank. Remember, a good rule of thumb is 1 inch of fish per 1 gallon of water. If the ammonia is too high, you can perform more frequent water changes and add API ammo lock to neutralize any ammonia. When the temperature is too high, you can check the heater and thermometer in the tank and replace either if they're faulty. In cases when it's just too hot, you can also let a fan blow over the tank to make sure it stays cool. And if you think your fish is suffering from a disease, you should diagnose the symptoms and treat them accordingly. High breathing rate. Your fish may not be gasping for air, but they may still have a high breathing rate. Once again, the most likely cause of this is poor water conditions, although some diseases may cause this to happen as well. If you notice that your fish is producing more mucus, especially around the gills, then disease or parasites could be the problem. Otherwise, the water quality in the tank could be too poor. Solutions. Once again, changing the water should be your first priority, and then after that, you can figure out whether the tank has too much ammonia, not enough oxygen, poor water conditions, etc., and act accordingly. Pinecone scales. Sadly, if you notice that your fish has pinecone scales, then the chances of their survival are slim to none. Pinecone scales are a clear sign of dropsy, and if your fish is suffering from dropsy, normally, the best solution is euthanasia. If you're not sure what pinecone scales look like, it's when the scales of your fish stick out after the fish becomes swollen. Dropsy is normally caused by a buildup of infection and damage inside your fish, and if they are suffering from it, at this point, the damage is normally irreversible. Swollen belly. If your fish has a swollen belly, it's a good indicator that they could be suffering from dropsy, especially in cases where their scales have pinecone too. However, don't rule your fish out just yet if they're only suffering from a swollen belly. Constipation and swim bladder disease could also be reasons your fish has a swollen belly too. Swimming sideways or upside down. Another sign that your fish could be dying is if they're swimming sideways or upside down. Fortunately, in some cases, they can still be saved, but in other cases, it could already be too late. The most common reason that a fish could be swimming like this is due to swim bladder disease. This occurs when the swim bladder of the fish is damaged. Constipation, injury, diseases, and parasites can all be behind this, but if you catch it early, you should be able to fix it. Solutions. If you think that your fish is suffering from swim bladder disease, then you should change the water to improve the quality. Once this is done, you can then work on the individual issues. If fish are suffering from constipation, often feeding them a dessaled peat or brine shrimp can get their digestive system moving again. On top of this, you can also fast them for a couple of days. However, if you think that poor water quality is behind the swim bladder disease, you should perform water changes more often. Testing the ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates regularly to make sure they're low enough. And lastly, if you think that the fish has been injured, there's not much you can do. If possible, move them to a quarantine tank with no sharp objects. If you can't do that, take any sharp objects out of the tank, and make sure there's nothing else they can hurt themselves with. They've stopped eating. One of the first signs that something is wrong with your fish and that they will potentially be dying is when they stop eating. The lack of appetite is most often caused by however, sometimes it can just be a thing. Either way, a lack of appetite and not eating is often a sign that your fish is starting to die. So, if you think your fish has stopped eating because they're sick, then you should try to diagnose the symptoms as soon as possible and treat them accordingly. So, it's a good idea to move them to a quarantine tank if possible, and if not, performing a water change to make sure the water is as clean for them is also a good idea. Their colour is starting to fade. Another sign that your fish is potentially dying is when its colour begins to fade. If your fish has dull colour, then it's often a sign of infection. However, fortunately, fading colour doesn't always mean your fish is going to die. In fact, sometimes the fading colour just means that your fish hasn't been given enough light. Solution: if your fish's colour is beginning to fade, then you should figure out whether it's because they're sick or because they're not given enough light. If it's the latter, the solution is simple. Just make sure you're keeping them in the light for longer. However, if their colour is fading, When you think hypoxia is behind them swimming strangely, then adjust the filter so it causes more ripples on the surface. As well as this, add an air bubbler or plants to the tank as well to increase oxygenation. Lastly, if you think your fish is suffering from an illness or disease, then move them to a quarantine tank. When you're there, feed them well and treat them as best you can. White spots on their body. White spots appearing on your fish's scales can indicate a parasitic infection, commonly known as tick. This ailment is a serious concern and can lead to a fish's death if not treated promptly. Solution: the key to managing this condition is early diagnosis and medication specifically designed for treatment such as API or good super Their gills are self-healing, and active or slow moving gill are a critical sign that your fish is struggling to breathe. This could result in poor quality caused by a build-up of ammonia or a lack of oxygen. To help the fish breathe more easily, if you notice your fish struggling to breathe, you should also test the weight right away to see what the parameters in the tank are. Redness on their body. Red patches or streaks on the body of the fish